Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the NCAA college basketball March Madness tournament. You guys here at Bill Vink Gaming. And now the coolest thing about this is the first time I'm actually doing one on my own. And I'm a huge college basketball guy, so let's get into this. A lot of you guys know right now we have actually going on the first four in Dayton, Ohio, as it is going to be LIU Brooklyn taking on Radford, as well as St. Bona versus UCLA, Arizona State versus Syracuse, NC State, North Carolina Central, taking on Texas Southern. And so for those, I did pick Radford for Radford versus LIU. Brooklyn, I did pick Radford. For St. Bona versus UCLA, I did pick UCLA. For North Carolina Central versus Texas Southern, I did go with North Carolina Central. For Arizona State, I did go with Syracuse. And now going on to the actual bracket, which is round one. We're going to kick it off in the South. Now, Virginia versus UMBC. I think we all know that there shouldn't be any upsets, in all honesty, in the first round. I don't really feel there, especially especially for the number one ranked team in each conference, I guess you could say. Then going to Creighton versus Kansas. Probably not the most popular choice, but I honestly would have to go with Kansas State at this point. I think Kansas State's going to do a lot better than Creighton in this game. I think it's going to be a close one, but I do think Kansas State is going to pull it off here, and so I'm going to pick Kansas State for that one. Now going on to Kentucky versus Davidson. I just because of how well Kentucky consistently plays in this tournament, I had to go with Kentucky. I think they're going to be one of the wild cards in this one. Not really a wild card. That's a little bit too vague. I'm going to say I think that they're going to be the guys that could almost win this thing if they play if they're on fire. And they've got a great squad. I said 2 or 3 of them probably going to enter the draft, probably get drafted. We all know what's going to happen. It almost happens every year. I'm really excited in terms of that. So I can't wait for that one. But I'm definitely going with Kentucky over Davidson. So I can see Davidson getting, of course, eliminated in the first round. Arizona, Buffalo. I do think here we're gonna have a shocker. A lot of you guys are probably like, "What? Are you kidding me right now?" I think Arizona's going to walk in a little bit too cocky against Buffalo. I think Buffalo's going to shock them here. And I think Buffalo's going to pull off an upset. I think it's going to be like a 2-point upset. I think it's going to be one of those things that come out right towards the end of the game. That's going to be a lucky shot. And I think Buffalo's going to go to the next round to face Kentucky. Miami, Florida versus Loyola. I did go with Miami, Florida, of course. Loyola is not that great to begin with. They're good, but they're not as great as Miami is. So I think based on if you just look at the ranking on this one, you get your answer of who's gonna make to round number 2. Then we have Tennessee versus Wright State. I of course going with Tennessee, the ranked 3 and the South. They've been on a roll lately. I mean, they haven't lost that many games to begin with, so I definitely went with Tennessee because I feel more comfortable with Tennessee. I think Tennessee's going to rock the house in this one, and that's pretty much that for that game. Nevada versus Texas. I think Nevada is not going to win this one. I think I'm going to go with Texas for an upset here. A lot of people, I think, don't have Texas going this far. I know a lot of people are doing that perfect NCAA, that perfect bracket thing. Pretty cool, by the way, though. You guys get to win a free custom car made by what's his name, Zach Levine, I think. So that's always cool. Free cars are always great. But going back to Texas, Nevada, I'm looking at this and I think Texas is gonna pull off an upset. I think they're kind of going in as the underdogs here, if you ask me. So I'm going with the underdogs here again. Then next up for the final game of the South is going to be Cincinnati versus Georgia State. I actually went with Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati is going to do a phenomenal job in this tournament up to about the Sweet 16. But again, I do believe that Cincinnati is going to probably wreck Georgia State, hands down, honestly with you. And then in the East, let's go start with the East now. It is the Villanova taking on LIU Rad / Rad. Of course, I think everyone here picked Villanova. I can't see Villanova not making it that far. So yeah, I can't see Villanova not making it that far. I think they can go over to the Final Four to be honest with you. And then it's Virginia Tech facing Alabama. I went with Alabama here. Much respect to Virginia Tech, but I don't think they're going to have that it factor it's going to take to beat Alabama. I think Alabama's going to come in there and clean house, so to speak. So yeah, my pick's going with Alabama. Then we have um, West Virginia versus Murray State. I picked West Virginia on this one. I think West Virginia is gonna again do the same thing that Alabama's doing, wipe the floor with Murray. Then we have Wichita State versus Marshall. I did pick Wichita. I think it's going to be a good game. I think Marshall's going to kind of keep good old Wichita on the heels, but I don't think they're going to have. I don't think they're going to go all the way in this game. They're probably going to quit middle of the second half. So again, my pick is definitely going to be Wichita State. Then next up, it is Florida taking on STBON UCLA. My goodness, what a name! Nonetheless, I picked Florida. I think Florida is going to easily defeat STBON. UCLA. God, I gotta actually look at that when I read it because it's so long. But I'm definitely going to go Florida on that one. Texas Tech, SF Austin. I think Texas Tech is the obvious choice here. I don't really see any other choice you'd really have in that category. So, of course, I'm going to go Texas Tech just because of, again, the ranking. I can't see FS Austin going that far. Arkansas versus Butler. I did go with Arkansas. Now, I know a lot of people might have not be happy with that one, but I did go with Arkansas. Sorry for those of you guys who are a Butler fan. But next up is Purdue versus CS Fullerton. I picked Purdue. I think Purdue's going to steamroll them on a whole nother level. And so, again, I hit up with Purdue. Then going down to the West here, we're going to kick it off with Xavier and NCCU versus slash TXSO. What is with these names? They're killing me. But I did pick Xavier. I think everyone knows Xavier's kind of a lock for at least the Elite Eight. Then next up is Missouri versus Florida State. This is one of those where you look at your bracket and you question, this is the game that could mess everything up for that perfect bracket. Now, honestly, I'm picking Missouri. I think Missouri is going to beat Florida State. And it's going to be a really close one. I'm keeping this to like one of those four to like 6 point games where you're on the edge of your seat. Missouri's got some great guys, so is Florida State, but they're gonna have either one of these teams. I think are gonna have a tough time with Xavier to begin with. So I'm gonna go with Missouri. Next up is Ohio State versus South Dakota State. I went with Ohio State. I think it's an obvious choice here. I think they're gonna steamroll South Dakota. So I went with, of course, with Ohio State. Then it was Gonzaga versus UNC Green. I went with Gonzaga. I thought that was again an easy choice. I didn't think it was a hard choice, to be honest with you. Then I had Houston, San Diego State. I picked Houston, but I'm like as I look through that one again, I feel that there could be an upset there with San Diego State going to round number 2. But I'm gonna stay with my gut. That says Houston, but there could be an upset on that one, to be honest with you. Michigan versus Montana. I of course went with Michigan on this one. I thought it was an easy choice. I don't think it was I thought it was a no-brainer. And then it was Texas A&M versus Providence. I picked Providence. A lot of people probably not going to be happy about that one. Probably people be like, "What? Why?" Providence normally shocks us somewhere down the line in this tournament. I think that this is going to be the shocker now. I don't see Providence going that far in this. I think round the Sweet 16 is being gracious and nice to them, but Providence definitely is going to beat Texas Tech in my opinion. So I want Providence. Then is North Carolina versus Lipscomb. Yeah. Again, no brainer. Please put North Carolina down on that one. Like, I'm begging you, please put North Carolina down. Then traveling to the Midwest, as we kick it off with Kansas versus Penn State. I of course went with Kansas. I can't see Penn going very far. No offense, Penn State fans, but Kansas I think is going to rock them in that one. Then it is Seton Hall versus North Carolina State. I went with North Carolina State. I think NC State's going to pull off a little bit of an underdog upset, maybe even a comeback in the second quarter. But second quarter, second half, puts the second half. This one, you have first half, second half, and these tournaments, college. So I'm going to go with NC State. Then we had Clemson versus New Mexico State. I went with Clemson, of course. Then Clemson's the obvious choice here in the Midwest. Then it was Auburn versus Charleston. I went with Auburn. I think Auburn is a lock for this one. I no offense, Charleston, but I don't think you guys have anywhere near close to what Auburn's doing right now. So again, I went with Auburn. Then it was TCU taking on ASU/SYR. I think the obvious choice here would be TCU. I think TCU's going to at least go to round number 2. So I'm not going to count them out there. Then it was Michigan State versus Bucknell. Again, obvious choice here, folks. Please pick Michigan State. Bucknell is not as good and nowhere near the level of Michigan State is. So please pick Michigan State. Then it was Rhode Island versus Oklahoma. I picked Rhode Island. Not a popular pick, probably, but honestly, I think Rhode Island is going to destroy Oklahoma. I think a lot of the Sooner fans and the Sooner basketball teams are getting a little bit too cocky with that one. Compared to Oklahoma, maybe ranked 10 and Rhode Island is 7. But if you look, Rhode Island's kind of one of those teams where they're either great one year or they suck the next. And so it is what it is in that category. But next up in the final game of round number 1 is Duke versus Iona. I picked Duke. So I think that was an easy one right there. Then if you go to round number 2, we're gonna keep it at the Midwest here, as it would be, in my opinion, as I kind of predicted here. This is now it goes to my predictions in terms of this far on. I think that Kansas and North Carolina State will be in there in round number 2. So I'm going to say Kansas defeats North Carolina State to advance to the Sweet 16. Then Clemson versus Auburn. I do believe Auburn will defeat Clemson, and it'll be Kansas versus Auburn in the Sweet 16 round. Then if you go down, it's TCU versus Michigan State. I picked Michigan State to go to the Sweet 16. And Rhode Island versus Duke. I picked Duke to defeat Rhode Island. So then you have Kansas versus Auburn and Michigan versus Duke in the Sweet 16 for the Midwestern region. Then if you go all the way to the South, you have, let's see, in the round number 2, you have Virginia versus Kansas State. I picked Virginia to go to the Sweet 16. Kentucky versus Buffalo. I picked Kentucky to go to the Sweet 16. Miami, Florida versus Tennessee. I picked Tennessee to go on. Cincinnati versus Texas. I picked Cincinnati to go on from that point. And then if we go travel to the East in round number 2, it is Villanova versus Alabama. I picked Villanova to go to the Sweet 16. And then West Virginia versus Wichita. I did pick West Virginia to upset Wichita State. And so it should be Villanova and West Virginia in the Sweet 16. Then it would be Florida versus Texas Tech. Again, I see another upset here. Florida would defeat Texas Tech, and Florida would go on to the Sweet 16. Arkansas versus Butler. I do predict a massive upset here, as Arkansas would defeat Purdue, and it would be Florida versus Arkansas and Villanova versus West Virginia and the Sweet 16 for that region. And then going to the West, I had Xavier versus Missouri. I think Xavier would beat Missouri and go on to the Sweet 16. Then Ohio State versus Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga would defeat Ohio State. So you'd have Xavier versus Gonzaga there. And then you'd have Houston versus Michigan. I do believe Michigan would defeat Houston, as Michigan would go on to the Sweet 16. Then it would be Providence versus North Carolina. And this is where the run, in my opinion, would stop for Providence, as Providence would lose to North Carolina. North Carolina would go on to the Sweet 16 to face Michigan, and Xavier would go on to face Gonzaga in the Sweet 16 for the West. Now, staying in the West for the Sweet 16 round, it'll be Xavier versus Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. So I think Xavier would defeat Gonzaga to go on to the Elite 8. And then it would be Michigan versus North Carolina. I think North Carolina would defeat It would defeat Michigan to go on to the Elite Eight in the Western region. Then, in the South region here, I did predict that it would be Virginia versus Kentucky. I do believe Virginia would then. This is probably the biggest upset in this one right now, as I do believe that Kentucky would defeat Virginia in a massive upset, and Kentucky would go on to the Elite Eight. Then it was Tennessee versus Cincinnati. I do predict that. I guess you kind of call it an upset because it'd be ranked 2 versus ranked 3, and I think Tennessee would kind of shock Cincinnati, and it would be Kentucky taking on Tennessee and the Elite Eight for the South. Then for the East, as we go to the East here, and the Sweet 16 would be Villanova versus West Virginia. I think Villanova would make it to the Elite Eight, knocking out West Virginia. Florida versus Arkansas. I do believe that Arkansas would knock out Florida, and it's kind of an upset, but I think more of a shocker, as Arkansas would defeat Florida to face Villanova in the Elite Eight for the East. Then for the Midwest, I did predict that it would be Kansas versus Auburn. I think Kansas would defeat Auburn to go on to the Elite Eight. And then it'd be Michigan State versus Duke. And I do believe that Duke will shock Michigan State. And I mean, let's see the ranking. Yeah, no. But Duke actually wouldn't shock. But I do believe people don't give Duke enough credit. So I think it would be kind of a shock, as Duke would defeat Michigan State to go on to the Elite Eight to face Kansas. So then, staying in the Midwest for the Elite Eight, I do believe that Duke would then beat Kansas, and I think it would be kind of a shocker, not really, but I do believe that Duke would go on to the Final Four and defeat, and would, because they defeat Kansas to go on to the Final Four for the Midwest, representing the Midwest. Then for the East, see who would be representing them as we go to the East here. Villanova versus Arkansas. I do believe Villanova would defeat Arkansas to represent the East in the Final Four and face Duke in the Midwest, and face the Midwest representee Duke. And then if you go to the South, I do believe that in the Elite Eight, Kentucky will defeat Tennessee in another shocker, as Kentucky would go on to the Final Four and represent the South. Then for the West, it would be North Carolina versus Xavier. I think North Carolina would kind of shock us all, as they would defeat Xavier and go on to represent the West, as North Carolina would then face Kentucky in the Final Four, and Villanova would also face Duke in the Final Four. Now, keeping up in the Final Four here, as we go into the South/West region now, it'd be Kentucky versus North Carolina, and the winner of the South/West region would go on to the national championship, which I feel Kentucky would again shock the world again, defeat North Carolina to go on to be in the national championships. And then for the East/Midwest side, I do believe Duke would also shock the world and defeat Villanova and go on to national championships. So we'd have Kentucky versus Duke, and the winner of that, the national championships, in my opinion, would be Duke. I think Duke is going to shock us kind of, and really Duke is going to be the team that wins this national championship, and that is my pick to win it all, folks. Duke University to win the national championship in the 2018 March Madness NCAA bracket. So with that being said, everybody, if you have any questions, please comment below, like, subscribe to Bill Vink Gaming. We'll see you next time, everybody. Stay off the hook. Peace out.